Happy Sunday night, guys. It's great to see you, my Libertarian friend. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, buddy. Doing well. Glad to be here. Thank you.
And Chris, man, how are you?
I'm doing great. I had my second dose of the vaccine the other day. My cat, who was missing for 2 days, has returned, and I'm starting spring break. So life could not
get into that. We definitely got that's a lot we got to get into. So, and I love doing this show every Sunday night, Refounding Fathers. A chance to talk to you guys. It's so great to have you on. But Chris, man, you got to steal the show tonight because we're going to be getting into a lot of libertarian stuff. But before we do that, we got to focus on you, man, because here's how it happened to me, right? Is I forget what night it was. I think it was like, it might have been Wednesday night or Thursday night. I don't remember. But like, it was like in the middle of the night and my phone starts going off and buzzing, which doesn't really happen, like too often to me. And my wife is like, who is calling you at like 3 a.m.? And I was like, oh, it's Chris the liberal. What is going on? And then he was like, I found my cat. And I was like, you know what? He's an empathetic person. Like, this is a big one. And then I was like, maybe he's in California. And I was like, wait a minute. It's like in the middle of the night in California too. This is like hella late. So you got to tell us the story, man. And I've made a segment for you to do just that called The Search for Oswald. So tell us the full story, man. What happened?
Yeah, well, apparently Oswald was just very moved and inspired by Kyle's words about libertarianism over the last few weeks, and
had to go be his own cat. I get it.
He had the desire to be free and the yearning to be free, and I do hold Kyle responsible for that. But no, he's always wanted to be an outside cat, and we just have not allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
And he made it happen. We built an enclosure for him outside and everything. And that just wasn't enough. And it's really my fault because the locks on the enclosure had not been doing too well. Yeah. And I really should have fixed them a long time ago. But yeah, we went out there Thursday morning, and the enclosure was wide open. We couldn't find him anywhere in the house. And so I ended up calling in sick so that I could just look for him all day because we had no idea if he would come back, if he would know how. We spent Friday in the same kind of panic, but thankfully Friday night around 3 a.m., he woke me up from a dead sleep. I heard the flap to the cat door open and I just shot up and there he was. So it was a huge relief.
Yeah, like a good libertarian, like he used his freedom for good. He went out and he experienced the world and he came right back home. So, he's got the libertarian piece and the conservative piece. He knows to go back to his roots, right? I love it. So, but so emotionally, you guys are doing good. Like, I'm sure it was a huge relief for y'all and all that. Like the saga of Oswald. I've been
Absolutely.
through. Go ahead.
My wife and I don't have kids, so our cats kind of are our kids, and they are indoor cats. So everyone was kind of like acting like, "What's the big deal? Like cats go out all the time, but not these guys." So
yeah, well, I'm happy for you, man. That's great. So I've been through.
Absolutely.
A couple pets in my lifetime, had them come back. I've had one of them not come back, and that was tough, so you never really know, but worked out for you. So that's great, man. So,
yeah.
All right. So getting into our material for today, the first thing is we've got our media moment coming up. So we started doing this last week, is getting into a couple big events that are happening in the world. So Chris, we know your big event that, has happened and what's kept you busy, but we still get a chance to talk about movies and, shows and all that kind of stuff that's going on. And last time we took a look at Snyder Cut. I still haven't seen this. Last week I said, like, I don't know where I'm going to find 4 hours. I still don't know where I'm going to find 4 hours, but I watched a couple clips on YouTube. I watched, I think, like some side-by-sides between what was it, Chris Whedon, I think, who did the original one, and then what Snyder did. And it's kind of like what you said. It's a darker version and all that stuff. So we've given our take on that, but I know you're a big Marvel fan as well, Chris. So tell us what's going on in the Marvel world.
So Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Disney Plus is thankfully not a 4-hour movie. I believe there's 6 episodes, 40 minutes each. So not as short as WandaVision as far as like episode length, but a fewer number of episodes. And it's pretty good so far. It's got a lot of action, and it is a very political show in ways that I think could appeal to both liberals, conservatives, libertarians. It's dealing with a lot of political issues like race, nationalism versus globalism. There's a big conflict. The main antagonists so far are called the Flag Smashers, and they are a group that believes in a world without borders. So, of course, a lot of liberals are reacting to the show saying, like, wait, why are they the villains? Wondering if it's like some kind of commentary on like Antifa. But it's looking like there's like some other group really pulling the strings. And there are a lot of fans who say things like, comic books and comic book properties shouldn't necessarily engage with politics. But, if you look at this cover from one of the most famous Captain America covers of all time, of Cap punching out Hitler, now we look back at that and we think, who could be offended by that? But at the time, it was actually quite a bold political statement because we had not yet entered World War II. And there was a very large isolationist and ultranationalist movement in America called America First that really strongly opposed getting involved in this conflict for reasons ranging from just simple isolationism to, in the extremes, actual sympathy for Hitler. So this was very controversial. And I think the idea of comic books and superheroes engaging in political messages has a very long and robust history.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about, that's in both, right? Like DC and Marvel. I think about the Batman movies with Christian Bale, right? And there was like, at the time, there was parallels to the Bush administration and the war on terrorism and all this stuff it was pretty controversial, and
government overreach, spying on citizens.
Yeah, exactly. There was that piece of it as well. The NSA was clearly being invoked. I mean, so many different things. So I don't put it past them. The only question is, does that date it a little bit? I mean, obviously, this is like historic now and appropriate for the times, but they've, since had to update it and everything else. And when you start to wade into those waters, I mean, with just how volatile political debates are, you risk, angering half of America, right? Especially like this year, with the election and everything else that's going on. So I haven't seen what you're talking about, but I am interested in getting into it. Maybe we can get into a couple of segments and break those down and see where we fit. What are your thoughts, Kyle?
I don't honestly don't have a ton to add to this. Comic books and comic book movies have never been my favorite genre. I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know Captain America had been around long enough to have punched Hitler in the face before America entered World War II. So I thought that I didn't know we'd been around that long. But it is always interesting to see how media companies in particular, like movie companies and people who are making scripted content are seeking to influence culture in many different ways. So interested to see kind of what shakes out of this and what happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point because, I've had so many friends who are like, I'm just going to the movies. Like, who cares if it's political or not? It doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect my kids. Like, it's just a movie, whether it's Star Wars or Marvel or whatever. And it's like, actually, like if you look into history and you think about how political movements have built, multimedia has been the most important piece. I mean, for whether it's America and common sense and what Thomas Paine did, whether it's socialism and what Lenin and the communists did in Russia, like it's helpful for both sides. You're able
Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yeah, Uncle Tom's Cabin is probably one of the most responsible factors in moving the anti-slavery movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you say politics is downstream from culture, right? So if you want to influence what happens politically speaking, you influence culture first. And obviously there's arguably not a big cultural influencer right now than Marvel. So really going to be interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into something that you know a little bit better, Kyle, and that's I have my Freedom hat on here today. This is a hat that a friend of mine gave me. He was working for a church called Free Church, and he's like, "Hey, man, I got this hat for you." So two things that you know about there, like freedom as well as Christianity, put together in a hat. Yeah. So this is a tribute to you, man, because it's been so much fun the past few weeks as we focused on libertarian, moving kind of past the election and all the controversy with that dominated our show, as well as the entire like national narrative for months. Gave us a chance to be able to kind of focus on you and bring you into the conversation a little bit. And I loved our last show. I sent out an email to everyone who follows what we're doing, several hundred folks, about our last show, because, I mean, where else are you going to find a conservative, a liberal, and a libertarian all discussing abortion? First of all, commonsensically, without like tons of emotion or anger or judgment. And then even more importantly, getting to areas of common ground. I love some of the
Yeah.
things that you said, Chris, talking
Yeah.
about envisioning a world where abortion is unneeded, which is different than conservatives because we envision a world where it's illegal, but a world where it's unneeded sounds pretty good too. Right? There was points of agreement there, as well as with Kyle talking about human rights and how that's the bedrock of libertarianism. And there's just enormous amounts of overlap that was very encouraging for me. So,
Yeah.
how about for you guys?
I absolutely agree. It's been great to have this conversation in a way that we are really working through kind of our ideological commitments, but also looking at the practical results of certain policies as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Go ahead.
after you, Kyle.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that it's a good thing when people from different backgrounds, different ideologies, different philosophies can come together and speak respectfully, find that common ground, like you said, just kind of echoing that sentiment. And, obviously we're not going to solve all the world's problems here, but if we can initiate that dialogue, I think that's a good thing that we're doing.
Absolutely. So take a look as we kind of like start to wrap this up and move towards a sense of closure with it. We had several comments on the show as well as a couple afterwards. And one of them here was from Megan, and I'll expand this so you can actually see it. And she said, abortion wouldn't be necessary if people would just stop being idiots. We have the means to fix the issue, but we won't do it. And there's a whole lot there. So I'm curious to get your take on that, because that goes directly at some of the things I think that you were saying, Chris, about a need for education, people to make informed decisions, and yet in some cases that doesn't happen, right? So what are your thoughts first on that?
Sure. Yeah, think it would help to know what she means by like if people
Yeah.
would just stop being idiots. You're right to bring up the idea of education. It's a fact that more educated countries and places with better sex education specifically tend to have lower abortion rates.
Yeah.
But I think this comment puts a little bit too much emphasis on individual choice.
Okay.
Which, of course, as a liberal, I always think that people put too much emphasis on individual choice, which is something that I'm sure you two will both disagree with me on. Whereas I feel like it is much more of a systemic issue, and the solutions are not necessarily something that can be expected to be solved by individual choice.
So what do you make of that, Kyle?
Well, going back to the comment, I think Chris is right. I think we need a little more context to, I think, answer it in a way that is, meaningful. If the issue is people being idiots about engaging in sexual activity in a way that can lead to pregnancy, that's one thing. If we're talking about contraception, that's a whole nother thing, because there are many contraceptive options out there that are fundamentally abortifacient, which hardline Christians would not see as a good thing. And so I think we really, before we kind of answer that question thoroughly, I think we definitely need to have more of an explanation. But just kind of answering topically, I think Chris is onto something there. Education is never a bad thing. And we need to educate people on their choices. Obviously, there's only one way for people to get pregnant. And so the more that we can educate people on not just the science of life or procreation, but also ways to avoid unwanted pregnancy, things like that. I think that's a good start.
Yeah. So, but he mentioned individual choice, right? And that being too much of a focus. And I guess that kind of brings me to the final question I have. Is when I think about libertarianism and I think about all the points that you've brought up over the past few weeks about it, it seems like that is the guiding principle, right, of libertarianism, is that everything, the entire philosophy, if you had to shorten it down to two words, from what I see, it would be individual choice, because that's what libertarians seem to prize above everything, above patriotism, above history, above tradition, even at times above spirituality, is this notion that everything comes down to an individual's choice. And yet, when we start to break down that notion of choice, and people make decisions for all sorts of reasons, right? Some of them tend to be somewhat subconscious, right? Like we have influences. We just talked about how media has this enormous influence on culture, even through entertainment, when they're not even trying to do it explicitly. And so this notion of individual choice being separate is something that I wrestle with all the time, right? If we talk about freedom,
Well,
there's overlap, but
yeah, go ahead.
I want to hear kind of your thoughts. Is that how you see libertarianism, and do you defend it on those grounds?
I don't necessarily think I would call it individual choice
Okay.
per se. I would say that we seek to bolster individual rights. The smallest minority is the individual, and so when we talk about minority rights, we're talking about the rights of the individual. But more than calling it, individual choice or something like that, voluntarism is really the kind of the driving factor. Right, that we believe that every interaction, whether that's with a business, whether that's with another individual, whether that's with a government, should all be done voluntarily. It should be done without the coercion of an external force, making you interact with another person, buy a product, pay taxes, whatever. And so I think I would couch it in that terms. And when you think about voluntarism and procreation, outside of outside of rape, for lack of a better term, that's what it is, I guess. It is the individual making that choice, and it is people entering into that transaction voluntarily. So,
yeah. In your response to Chris, you said that you think there's too much focus on individual choice in both the conservative and libertarian worldviews. Why?
Well, I think the thing with most liberals is that we obviously are very supportive of individual choice in many areas. I mean, our entire position on abortion is called pro-choice. But I think that we tend to address problems differently, and we also especially tend to address harm differently, and the concept of harm. A libertarian perspective on COVID, for instance, might be, I get to choose whether or not I wear a mask, and the government shouldn't force me to do that. Or even on, vaccines, the government shouldn't force me or my child to have a vaccine because that is our individual choice. And we are not technically going out of our way to harm anyone by making that choice. Whereas a liberal would say, well, I mean, that choice can harm people collectively. It might not be an easy thing to see that harm right away. It might not be a direct harm, but it's an indirect harm. And the same thing when it comes to regulations on pollution, or even tax policy or speech policy. There are many liberals, and I am not one of them, who believe that certain types of racist or bigoted speech should be regulated by the government, like it is in Germany, where Holocaust denial is against the law, because the theory is that causes harm to disenfranchised groups. Now, I would say if you do start criminalizing speech, that tends to suppress minorities and end up causing more harm to them. If you look at France, where they've banned the burkini and other forms of Muslim religious expression, those kinds of laws do end up being targeted at ethnic minorities and people who are already disenfranchised. So I wouldn't go that far toward the liberal perspective on harm, but it does kind of show the different balancing tests that we place on individual choice versus the safety of the collective.
Yeah, I think the way that I see individual choice is that it's enormous risk, right? And I think the reason I say that, and I get this from Burke, is there is a potential when you put your faith or your trust into voluntarism, like as Kyle is saying, to that it may not be self-sustaining. Is that I love there was the Daily Show when Jon Stewart was still doing it, and he was looking at Ron Paul, and he's like, you seem to be very principled and have a lot of integrity, and Americans don't usually go for that. And Ron Paul laughed. It was funny, but it was also true, is that that's not normally what Americans are looking for. We may say that at times, but when it comes to vote, we are easily swayed, right? We do tend to go with the parties over realistic third options. If given a free society, the question is, are you going to be able to sustain it? Are you going to continue to have it? Because it requires an enormous amount of maturity to maintain.
Yeah.
You have to have people who vote and participate and care and are able to manage their lives in such a way that they feel some type of civic responsibility. And to be honest, that's not always me, and that's not always the average American.
Well, so you hit on responsibility. I watched just a few minutes of your talk on rights the other day. Didn't get to watch the whole thing, but you talked about the nature of rights, and you said inherent within rights, and you think this is something that I think libertarians, at least that's kind of what I gather from you, is that libertarians are about the rights, but not necessarily about the responsibility that comes inherent with those rights. And I would say that that is somewhat true. It's true for a lot of people, certainly. But I would say that, well, there are two things. One is an inherent trust that people will not abuse that right, that people will act responsibly with it. So it's kind of a faith in humanity that, yes, you have this thing, but we must act responsibly with it.
Yeah.
I guess the larger point that goes with that is that if we don't have that right to begin with, then we've lost something already, right? So, like if we talk about, say, the right to free speech, right? Like that's something I'll be very passionate. Something that libertarians are very passionate about, and we can say that maybe we focus too much on it, or gun rights, anything. You pick your issue, something that libertarians yell and scream about, rights and rights and rights. But if those rights are already gone, then you can't be responsible with them, if that makes sense, right? The rights are already gone. So, yeah.
That was Burke's whole critique of, he saw a difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. In the American Revolution, he saw a people who knew,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
knew how to handle freedom, they had demonstrated the responsibility and could apply it and deserve to maintain it, as opposed to what the British were doing. And then he saw the French Revolution, where he saw this just absolute hatred, this vilifying of everyone who was against them, and this bloodthirstiness that he just couldn't abide. And he was like, freedom is the worst. I mean, you think about, we encounter this every day in our lives, right? I got 2 kids, and someday my kids are going to want to drive, right? Like when they start to hit 14, 15, they're going to be excited to drive. And I'll be able to look at them at that point and say, well, okay, you've demonstrated a lot of maturity. You're ready for this next big thing. Or you haven't. You're constantly screwing up in school. Your teachers are complaining about you. The last thing I want to do is give you a car that could go kill somebody, So it's this notion of balance. And I guess I think that's where you and I find personally common ground, Kyle, is I think we both have a respect for both freedom and morality, right? Because those two things have to go together. So what are your thoughts, Chris, as we start to wrap this up?
Yeah, a lot to respond to there. I mean, you brought up the idea of risk, and then Kyle mentioned faith in humanity. And I think those two things are so hard to balance. I mean, human beings are just notoriously bad at assessing risk. We tend to overinflate the risks of things that we don't want to do, while drastically minimizing the risks of things that we do want to do. So for many conservatives, it's the risks of immigration. We've got this huge crisis happening at the border right now, and the liberal position is, let them in. And then maybe that will reduce some of the harm that is happening at the border. Whereas the conservative position is, we can't let them in. We can't let them all in, because it will bring crime and drugs and disease. And I just feel like the way that risk is being balanced on that issue just isn't very rational. On the liberal side, it pains me to say this, given the recent national tragedies involving guns over the last few weeks, but there have been many times that I have questioned whether many liberals are overinflating the risk of the Second Amendment and the risks of people owning guns compared to the harm of policies that might be more restrictionist.
Yeah.
It's like prohibition, the harms that were caused by prohibition. Yes, there were a lot of harms caused by alcohol, especially in the early 19th century, when it wasn't really regulated at all. But the harms of prohibition greatly outweighed that. So what I appreciate about libertarianism is it gives you a lens through which you start with the presumption of faith in humanity, and you start with the presumption of individual choice rather than the presumption of the harm and the risks. And then you have to say, okay, do these risks outweigh the benefits of allowing people to just do what they want?
That's it. I mean, that's fascinating, and I think that's our next topic right there. You've just given it to us, is talking about gun rights, because I mean, we've just covered abortion, and I think we've done an amazing job, and I really appreciate you guys and how balanced your perspectives were, and insightful they were. I think gun rights is the next big thing. If there was one other issue that can compete with abortion in terms of divisiveness in this country, it has to be gun rights. And Parkland, and I mean, going all the way back to Columbine, you know, we've all known that our entire lives. So let's take a look at that. We'll look at some of the research and some of the like leaders on that, and then see where we stand. So thank you guys so much for being on the show. Thanks for the great perspectives, for everybody watching. Looks like we had about 7 or 8 folks watching live. Let us know your thoughts. Who do you agree with more? What will be your critique if you don't agree? We'd love to hear that. We've got numerous other issues that we can get into as well. But with these guys, I always love jumping into the tough stuff, because I know we're going to come out still friends in the end. We're going to move on to our Conservatism on Tap show here in about 15 minutes. We'll reset for that, and then we'll do Refounding Fathers. It's going to be at least another week and a half, 2 weeks before we do this show again, because we do have Easter coming up, so we'll be taking a break for that. But in the meantime, thanks again, guys. Love having you on, and we'll see you then.
Thank you very much.